So welcome to our first eState user webinar. And as you may know, the Law Society allows us as accredited providers to give professional hours for learning about technology and learning how to use technology. And they think it's important, we think it's important, and that's why you get 15 minutes of professionalism for this session. We're thrilled that you're here, and feel free to log into your eState account for these sessions, because there may be some hands-on things that you may want to try out and see if you can replicate what we're trying to do and figure out how to do it, because that's the way you learn. So the first part of this, today's presentation, is really about the scenarios and why we use them and how to use them efficiently with your client so that it does what you want it to do. So I'm sharing my screen, so hopefully you can see that. And I want to just talk first about why do we even have scenarios. So if you remember this, that eState was created to be client-centric. It was to be made so that clients could follow a process when planning their wills. Rather than jumping around from asset to asset, oh, you want this to go to this person, and if they're not alive, who do you want it to go to? And then what do you want? We wanted to structure. And so that's why we came up with this idea of these three scenarios. And each scenario, you have to understand, is a separate fact situation. The first fact situation is the surviving spouse, then the scenario for descendants only, and then no descendants. Well, in essence, there's a built-in gift over, okay? As you switch from one scenario to the next scenario to the next scenario, because by definition, if you're in the surviving spouse scenario, the surviving spouse is alive. Once you move to the descendants only scenario, the surviving spouse has died, okay, or predeceased if it's in either case. And now, so the spouse is not alive in the descendants only scenario. And similarly, there are no descendants alive in the no descendants scenario. So as you move through each, there's in essence, like I say, a built-in gift over, okay? So I always start, and again, this if your client does not have a spouse, the surviving spouse scenario will not appear, okay? But if they do have a spouse, they will appear. And we're going to plan out the will for what do you want to do if you die first and your spouse is alive, okay? And you'll go through, what do you want to do? Okay, your spouse is alive. Well, I want to give my RSPs to my spouse. Great, that makes perfect sense. You don't have to go on to, and if your spouse is not alive, because that's the next scenario. So just stick with the scenario that you're in, work through that, and then move to this next scenario. What do you want to do if your spouse is not alive? Okay. You don't have gift overs if things are going to the spouse with no strings, okay? Because by definition, if they're not alive, you're into the second scenario. And that's going to already plan for, if my spouse is not alive, do this, okay? So for example, I'm going to just make a simple gift of everything to the spouse, okay? So if I pick the spouse getting the residue, I pick the spouse as the beneficiary, and I'm giving them 100% of the residue, I don't need a gift over, because by definition, the next two scenarios will apply. Okay? So that's really fundamental to making eState work for you, is to understand these three scenarios, and each one has its own definition of who's alive at that situation. Now, there may be situations where, regardless of whether your spouse is alive or not, I want something to happen, okay? Let's say in a second marriage situation, my instructions are, listen, I want everything to go to my kids, whether my spouse is alive or not. Well, you still go through the same scenario planning. You say, okay, if my spouse is alive, then I'm going to just start from scratch. My instructions are, regardless of if my spouse is alive, I want it to go to the kids. Well, you do it the same way. If my spouse is alive, who do I want it to go to? I want it to go to my kids. Okay, great. I'll do that. And then I finished this scenario. I'm going to move to the second scenario. If my spouse is not alive, well, I want the exact same gift. Okay. Now I could do it manually, like I just did here. Okay. But there's another shortcut, and I'll show you that in a second. In this case, the surviving spouse scenario, everything to the kids, is exactly the same as the descendants only scenario. And you say, but why I don't want to repeat things. Well, in the will, it's not going to repeat. It knows, eState knows, it's going to match scenarios. It's going to say, oh, scenario 1, which is surviving spouse, has exactly the same gift as scenario 2. So it doesn't matter. So I'm going to draft it properly that way. Okay. I'm going to combine them and put them in one. So it's smart that way. It's not going to say, if my spouse is alive, give it to my kids. If my spouse is not alive, give it to my kids. It's not going to do that. It sees that these are matching scenarios. But you still run through, and my suggestion is still running through the 3 scenarios, even if the plan is the same, because you can then demonstrate to the client, and it's a useful demonstration to confirm that that's what they want. That, look, if my spouse is alive, everything's going to my kids. Yes, that's what I want. And then if your spouse is not alive, everything's going to kids. Yes, that's what I want. Okay. So that's the way eState works. And it works for that way for the reason that it's understandable to the client. In our view. Anyway, that's our theory. I mentioned shortcuts. If I want to create a gift, for example, a legacy, let's say I have $10,000 to charity. There are 3 scenarios I could put this in. Okay. I could put it in if my spouse is alive only, then they get the gift. So let me just show you how that would work. Let me just make a cash legacy to James, for example. Okay. And this is important, again, for the concept of scenarios. So if in this case, what I've done here is I've put a gift only when my spouse is not alive, but I have descendants alive. Okay. That's the only time this cash gift gets paid. And that might be what the client wants. They say, look, when we're both gone, I want James to get $1,000. Well, then you've put it in the right scenario. Okay, it's gone in the descendants only scenario. But then you have to ask yourself, well, should it also be whether you have descendants only or you have no descendants? Does James still get the $1,000? Because the instructions might be different, yes or no. Well, if it is that James gets this gift, both in the descendants only scenario and in the no descendants scenario, then rather than having to type it out again or putting it in again, you can click on the 3 buttons and automatically copy that same gift, the exact same gift, to another scenario. So I can just do that. So if the instructions are, yes, I want James to get money, whether I have kids a lot, as long as my spouse is gone, whether I have kids or I don't have kids, I want James to get the money. So now I've copied it to both the descendants only scenario, that is where I have kids, but also to the no descendants scenario where all my kids are gone. Okay. And we've all had cases, if you've done this for any length of time, where there's really specific instructions. Well, I want this legacy if my kids are alive, but I don't want James to get this legacy if everyone's gone because he's getting the residue, okay, or something like that. So that's why we build it this way. Each scenario, we go one by one. Does James get a legacy if the spouse is alive? No. Does James get a legacy if the spouse is not alive, but the kids, descendants are alive? Yes. Does James get a legacy if everyone's gone? Yes. Okay. And that's why it's important to go through each scenario, because that's how eState works. It's prepared to deal with unusual circumstances and ones where, there are conditions. that they're not just all the way through. So that's the concept of scenario planning. And then, and you go one by one. You know, it's in our view, it's a way to structure it in such a way that the client thinks through each scenario, because it's often, I find, difficult for clients to get their head around, oh, what do you mean everyone's gone? Well, you know, this, oh, how could that happen? Well, you could die and your kids could die before you. And, oh, I never thought of that. And that's why you know, and you can say, oh, in that case, this is what I want to do. And so that's the idea of scenario planning, and going one by one as you go. So that's what I wanted to do in the first 15-minute session, was really to just explain that concept, because it's so fundamental to how you use eState and how you explain things to clients, that and we do find that people struggle with it because it's a foreign, it's not necessarily the way you were taught or the way you learned how to think through this, but it is easier in our view for clients to follow one scenario at a time. Just before we get on to the next one, what happens if your spouse is alive when you die? Well, this is what I want. Sorry, a couple of other points. If your client has a spouse but has no children, okay, well, then you're going to deal with the surviving spouse scenario, but you're not going to deal with the descendants only scenario, because they don't have descendants unless they're planning to have future children. Then you could obviously use descendants only, but there's no reason to use descendants only if they have no descendants and they're not planning to have descendants. So you don't have to use all the scenarios if they're not applicable. The way eState would just work this, it would say, if my spouse is alive, do this. If my spouse is not alive, do this. And it wouldn't care whether, you know, it wouldn't worry about having descendants or not having descendants. You'd be into the no descendants scenario. And then you could plan, I want to go to charity, I want to go to family, etc. If the person has no children, no spouse, and you just would work with the descendants, with the no descendants scenario, right? They don't have a spouse, they don't have descendants, great, just work with this one scenario. Okay. I'm going to take not a break, but that's the formal portion of our program about scenario planning. Every week we're going to do a different topic, and the next set will be more hands-on. So we'll work on creating a trust gift, or an initial gift, or a hodgepodge clause, or a Henson trust, or one at a time, and we'll do that so that you get better at using eState. So any questions? So feel free to open your mic and fire away.
Sorry, Jordan, I'm Jody Feldman. I just want to be clear on the last scenario that you just did. So I have a client who is not with spouse and doesn't have her own descendants, but she does have a long list of people that I have to do things for. So she has a primary for residual beneficiary, and she has a secondary set of classes for cousins that get all these bequests. And so is it only because she has no descendants, do I run macro? Or how do you just go through?
You just go to no descendants, and you'd say, okay, if you know, because basically it's your only scenario. So you'd say, I want to give a cash gift to this person. I want to give, artwork to this person. I want to do this. I want to do that. And then let's say you said, well, and if so-and-so's alive, if Jimmy's alive, but pretend they're not the son, let's just say James is alive. Yeah, he gets, 100%. But if he's not alive, because you're going to probably have further gift overs, right?
Okay, so that's my question. Okay.
Yeah. Then you go to specific distribution.
Okay. Yep. I didn't know what to do with the problem okay. And then one last question on this. Are you currently allowing people to put their RRSPs back in the estate, or are you using the direct designation?
Well, typically, I mean, if the spouse is the beneficiary, if you want the spouse to be the beneficiary of your RSPs, then I typically do that through the will. Even if they're already designated directly? I just do it to confirm, because you can do, a group, you can do a designation, a general designation of RSPs where you can't do that for insurance policies, but you can say all of my RSPs, for example. Well, if they had any that weren't covered,
I got you.
this would cover it. But
Okay.
again, it's personal choice whether you want to do that.
Okay. Thank
If
you
I
very
didn't
much.
want to do that, just so you know, if I
Yeah.
didn't want to do that, when I did my reporting letter,
Yes.
this is a good little hint here or a tip. So when I did my reporting letter, one of the questions it is, do I include registered asset beneficiary designations? I would make sure that was unclicked because I did not include an RSP designation. And then the reporting letter would warn the client, I confirm I did not do an RSP because you told me you had valid beneficiary designations on all your blah, blah, blah. So
Got it.
that's the advantage there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? So just my point on this about gift overs, you'll see many more gift overs. For example, in a no descendants scenario, if you've got, I want to go to this person, and then if they're not alive, or these 5 people, and then if they're not alive, I want it to go to, this charity or that charity. That's when you start using the specific distribution gift over, because then you can say, okay, if James is not alive, then I want to, give it to these 3 charities divided this way. And you can recreate a whole new kind of residue clause in the specific distribution.
So I'm sorry to have one last question for you. When do you push the button run macro?
Okay, so let's just talk about that. So the macros, we have these standard gifts, okay? So if you're leaving, 50% to the siblings, like if your instructions are give 50% to my siblings with a gift over to their descendants, then you'd click the run macro.
Got it.
And it
Got
would
it.
automatically create
nieces
that.
and nephews. That's what I was looking for. Okay, that helps me.
So there's nieces and nephews, there's spouses, nieces and nephews. And then you can go in, just because you ran a macro doesn't mean you can't change that. You can then go into this and change it.
Okay. I was just looking because this is a woman who has no spouse and she's independent.
Yep, for sure. Yep. Any other questions about scenario planning or anything really about eState? Any questions, anything that people have questions on how to do, and we can sort of do them live?
Oh, hi, Jordan. It's Craig Tedford here. Happy New Year.
Hi, thank you. Hey,
quick question for you, a little bit sideways from this, but is there any future plans to have a function where you can pump out all the documentation in one click? So the multiple bills, the power of attorneys, as opposed to doing it piecemeal?
Yes, there is. But absolutely. It's a little more complicated than that. But,
absolutely, understood.
But absolutely, one click in the documents rather than going one by one. Yes, absolutely. I feel your pain. I have the same pain. But one of the things that you'll see in wills and in any document that you're creating, and the reason you can't do it that easily is there's options that are specific to the documents that you may want to set before you generate. So that's the only thing, but we're going to solve that problem because you're going to be able to set it even before you generate. So it'll be set, and then you're like, yes, generate all, and it'll work.
And just a further question. I'm not sure if it's intentional, but when these documents get generated in Word, and then sometimes you convert them to PDF to send to the client, it always seems to be, the author is eState planner. Is that intentional, or is that something, because it's always, sometimes you save it, you change it, and sometimes by the time you convert it, it still goes out of the client. It's in the internal documentation that it says author eState. Okay.
Michaela will make a note of that, and that's just a setting on their document. We can fix that. That's great.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything like that, things like that, for anybody who's listening, just feel free to reach out to us. If there's something that's not, that you don't like, there may be a reason for it, but there may well not be, and it's just not something that we knew was a problem. And so let us know, and we'll get that resolved.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions about how the scenarios work, and when would you switch from one scenario to another scenario and things like that? Or does that make sense? All right. Any other, while we're here, I got 10 minutes. Any other questions about eState or how you use it or suggestions or just so you know, I'm going to give you guys a sneak peek at something. Okay. So Michaela, don't tell anyone about this. Okay. I have your confidence. So we are launching, if not this week, soon. It's probably, no, it's going to be end of week. And this feature, and that is our first time that you're going to be able to customize clauses. So we're starting with the administrative provisions. And so in your document, you'll be able to create what you like. So if you like our sell postpone power, right? If you like a simplified version, we have a simplified version. And then if you want to add your own, you can paste it in here and it'll automatically print in eState your content. So the first release of that is the administrative provisions, but in essence, we're going to be doing that for every aspect of eState. So, you know, if you don't like our revocation clause, I want a simpler revocation clause, or I want a different one, great. You'll be able to do that once and it'll automatically generate in the documents. So that's obviously moving towards the more control that you have over what comes out. So you're the first to see how that's going to work. And so that'll be in your portal by the end of the week. And eventually we're going to get to this all documents at once thing. So that'll be a couple of months probably, but it's high on my list because it's a bit of a pain. Well, thanks everybody. Yeah, sure.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Greg Dubecki here.
Hey,
Hi,
Greg.
Jordan. Quick couple of questions, nothing major, but just something that I think might be useful for probably more than just myself. One is, and maybe this is, I'm not using it correctly, the ability to add regular witnesses just from the drop-down menu who aren't also subscribers,
Yes.
since we just often grab a clerk or, you know, receptionist or something from around the office to witness as needed. Is that something that either I have not correctly identified how to use it or is contemplated for the future?
It's intentional. It's
Okay.
intentional. We are going to allow for non-user witnesses. At some point, we're going to build that as a custom feature that will be available for different plans. But yes, so
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Another question I had, the ability to spit out something that's just watermarked with a draft already. Is that something that's come up at all?
Sure. We'll add it to the list. I know that some people had wanted it to say draft on it. So Word is a little finicky, but that is something that's on our list as well that we can, it's not that high a priority, but we can see if it's easy, we can do it.
Understood. Yeah. Thank you very much.
The other thing that I want done, I don't know if any of you have this issue, but when I put in a date for a will, I don't know that.
Yeah,
I don't know what the date is that I'm going to be signing. So I want to be able to put in a blank date.
Yeah.
I agree. That's been a problem because I want to generate one and then I have to redo it again.
Yeah. So you could always just change that manually, but yes, I want to be able to leave a blank date. So that's on our list too. Lots of these little things, for sure.
Thank you very much, Jordan.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for your support, everybody. And I'm really excited for what the next few months bring because we've got a whole bunch of new features that we're releasing. So make it easier and better and faster. So thanks. We'll see you again. Drop in any Tuesday at 12:30 and see you on Thursdays too, I hope, for our regular webinar. Have a great day, guys.